here, and then we'll go from there. Anything you guys wanted to talk about before we jump in? Cool. So let's get started here just to walk through real quickly. So first of all, let me just jump back to the beginning of my project here. So basically what I have here is a really simple node application. This node application builds out a React.js, or sorry, it's a Vue. It's a Vue.js site. And so essentially the tasks for building this are building up the node application, running the build steps. It outputs basically static files. From there, I either push that to a review app or I push that to a production instance, depending on my branch. And then, also depending on the branch, various different tests are going to run against it. So just starting out, so this is this is the application. It deploys to a VM instance that I have hosted on my Linode server. So I have two different Linode servers set up here. One of them is this main server, which I just have a number of sites on. That's the one I push my production to. Then I've also spun up a separate VM instance that is just using my GitLab runner. And the GitLab runner is where I'm actually doing my deployments to the review app too. So not only is it the runner for the review app, but it's actually deploying it into an environment on an Nginx server that's running on this runner and serving it up from there. So if I jump back to my project and pull up my CI file, I'll kind of show you what I have going on here. So first of all, I've set up all my different stages. And one thing to note about stages before we go further is that if you are going to use any of the include files that are part of AutoDevOps, and where you can see all these different templates is in this project here, which is something I would definitely recommend bookmarking as examples. So there's a bunch of different examples in here on how to get started with various different languages. But AutoDevOps is one of these templates that's included in here. And if you look in the AutoDevOps template, you'll see similar stages, but also you'll see all these include jobs. So I've done the same thing inside my YAML file where I've included these different files. And what I was saying about the stages is that you have to have the exact stages that are defined inside the templates for it to run. So what happens behind the scenes is that when I run my project on a commit, what's going to happen is it's going to take my YAML file, parse through the entire piece, grab all of these jobs and put them into a YAML file behind the scenes, one big YAML file that gets merged together and then runs the test that way. So it doesn't matter where you define jobs. It's one thing that is important to note. Like you can see here, I've included these jobs at the very end. That doesn't matter in terms of the flow in which my jobs are actually going to run in the pipeline. The only thing that determines that is the stage itself. So if I have stage build here, and then way down my file, I'm also have another thing that's in my build stage. That's also going to just get rolled up into my pipelines in the right order that I have my stages set up there. So, my build, test, and my deploy for my production branch, for example. So you got to make sure that those things map. That's one thing that's a little bit confusing because you don't always see these templates. That's why I always make sure to bookmark this page, because then I can go and say, okay, what is exactly happening inside these individual jobs themselves. So if I click into SAST, for example, you can see that it's set up on stage test. So I know that I need to have a stage test in my template so it can merge this job into it. Does that all make sense? I'm going to take that as a yes. No replies. So if I go back to my project again and go back to my repository, you'll see how I've got those different items defined. And so in this very first job here, this is kind of a one-off job that I've added in here for a couple of reasons. One is that for my project to run, I need to run it on a node image. And I have a node image that I was using, but it needed a few more packages installed in that node image. Actually, all it really needed in there was Git. And the reason why I needed Git into this in my image is so that my project actually uses Git dependencies to pull in extra functionality for my application to work. So I have to have Git installed on that. And so what I did in this case, which I actually could just remove this line because I don't need it anymore, is that I have a Docker file at the root of my directory. And in my Docker file, I've defined this mhart alpine node image. And so this is actually an image that lives out on Docker Hub. And using the shorthand inside GitLab, it knows to look for Docker Hub when I don't actually put in a fully qualified URL. It pulls in that image, and then all it's going to do is install Git into it. And that's all my Docker file does. It's very simple. But the reason why I needed that is because in my jobs, I need to use an image that has Git in it rather than using the Alpine image here. And then in my scripts installing Git, I've actually just done that inside the image itself. So it's pushed to my registry, and inside my registry, I'll have this image in here that's going to be used for those jobs rather than pulling in one from Docker Hub. So I did this for two reasons. One is that local caching of the image is going to be a lot faster if I do it inside my registry rather than pulling from Docker Hub. The second one is that I don't have to install Git at runtime anymore. Now that's actually just going to be inside the image. And so I can just actually install my application, run the build, and then run a cleanup after that. So this job here, I've set up, since it doesn't need to happen that often, it's a pretty much a static standard image. I've got this set up so that it only runs on schedules. And I've defined a schedule that this is going to run once a week. So if I go into my scheduled pipeline, I've got it running every day at 4 a.m. And so it just rebuilds that image so that I have a fresh image in there in the case that there was security updates that happened. It's going to pick all those up, and then it's going to install my Git inside of that again. And there I have it available for me in my pipelines to use that image in later build stages. So that's all that one does. And I guess the second part of the reason why I did that is so that I can actually use the container scanning functionality, because I'm not actually using containers for my project for deployments. I'm only using them for testing. So having that model where it looks for your latest build with the commit hash and pushes that to the registry and then retags it, I don't have to do any of that stuff here. I'm kind of jumping the corner here, but the reason why I wanted to do this is beyond just the fact that I'm actually running the template as part of my build, is that I can also show you how these overrides work. So I've overridden 3 different tests here. In this case here is for container scanning, and all that I'm doing here is pointing to my one image that I have defined. So it knows the name of the image because of the name of my project, and then I'm defining the tag to be the latest one. And so what this does is it runs my job, container scanning, and then during that time when I was talking about where it pre-compiles the entire Docker file, or sorry, the entire CI file, it's going to take these variables and put those in place of the variables that are currently inside the container scanning one. So if you looked at container scanning actual job itself, it defines these 2 variables. And so these 2 variables are getting overridden inside my file later on because I've defined it after the include template. So that's basically how you can include templates into your project, but still be overriding some of those variables. So this is kind of one of the directions the security team's going in general, and the AutoDevOps team, when trying to make this more flexible and more usable across larger audiences by allowing people to say, yeah, include this job, and I want to have all the updates that ever come along with that as you guys start to improve GitLab. But I do know that I need to override these certain things for my project to work. Now that becomes very easy to do by doing something similar like I'm doing in these 3 projects here.
Hey, Brian, this might matter for the recording. What you're presenting is just the GitLab CI YAML, right? And I don't know if you were navigating through it up or down. I'm not seeing that on the screen share in Zoom.
Oh, well, that's a problem. My screen sharing is paused. I don't know why it's paused. Let me stop the share. Sorry about that, guys. I thought that was showing that I was presenting, but apparently it's not. So let me go back to Zoom, try resharing. Can you see it now?
Yeah, I can see your mouse move now. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Yeah. So just let me back up there really quickly. So essentially, what I was talking about was this job here, which builds my Docker image that I'm using for these subsequent build and test phases. And you can see how I'm pulling in that image here. This is where I build the Docker image. All right, I log into the registry. I build my Docker image based off of that Docker file I have at the root. I push it into the registry with the predefined name, which is going to be the name of my project with the tag latest. And then that Docker job, the Docker scanning job, container scanning job, I've overridden the two variables so that it's knowing exactly which Docker file to be running the analyzer against. Because if I kept it the way it was set up by default, it would look for this type of syntax for looking for the image that it's looking for to run this job, out of the box. But since I don't want to do it that way for my project, I've redefined that, and it's only looking for this one particular image, and it runs the job against that one. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. So I'll move on past that. So basically, what I've talked about so far is I've built, I have building an image that I'm only using for my build and test phase, and talked a little bit about how you can pull these includes in and also override those includes with specific variables that have been predefined for that job in our repository for AutoDevOps. So if I jump back now to my project. Actually, I'll just go to my pipelines. We'll take a look at what a pipeline looks on our master one really quickly here, because it's the most basic and straightforward. You'll see that I have a build phase. And this build phase, all it's doing is building my node application. And once my node application has been built, it creates an artifact of the built application. It uses that build application to run all of our different tests against it, which I pulled into the pipelines. I have built my own unit tests for this project. It's really straightforward, just does a quick look to make sure that the application is built and running. And then it goes into a deployment stage. So very straightforward, my deployments. All I'm doing is deploying to a VM. And the way I'm doing that is because this is just a static site that I have an artifact defined from my build stage. All I'm doing in this stage is setting up SSH, and I test my SSH connection, know that my test that works, and then I'm running an rsync, which actually just syncs the files to my Nginx server that's serving up the files themselves. So that would be on my server itself, and then if I go to GL library where I've defined all of my DNS stuff, you can see the application up and running there. So pretty straightforward. All I'm doing is deploying with an rsync, copying, basically meaning it's just copying the files over to the point inside my Nginx server where it's going to serve up those files. That's all that's happening, right? So now that's my deployment one. But if I go to a merge request, and I'll look into one that I've already merged, this one where I added the Nginx review app. I think this is where a lot of times there's some confusion about, deploying web apps to dynamic environments or ephemeral environments without using Kubernetes. And so the way that I've done it in this case is I've essentially set up a Linode, basically a VPC that's going to run that just has, pretty basic requirements to it. It's got 1 CPU, 2 gigs of RAM. It's very small, but again, just hosting, a static application is more than enough. And so what I did is I spun this up, and then I went into the console. I don't know if console is going to work here. It does. And that's not what I want to do. Then once I got in here, all I did was two things. One was I set up an Nginx server. and configured the Nginx server to handle all of my wildcard sites. And so that's all I had to do is set up the Nginx server, set up all the wildcards so that my DNS will know where to look. And once I've done that, I just installed the runner in GitLab. And all I did for that was go to CI/CD, go to runners, and went through the install process. I'm running in Ubuntu on my server here. And once I've done that, all I have to do is configure it so that it becomes a runner. Here it is right here for this project. And you'll notice that in my runner here, I've tagged this with review apps. So that means that this particular runner is only going to be used with jobs that have been tagged with review apps. And this allows me to pinpoint a runner that has an Nginx server on it and knows what to do with it when I tell it to deploy my application. And so I do it very similarly. So let me go back to my project and show you the YAML file for my review. So I've built it up. I've tested my application in my review. You'll notice that I only run this on branches, so not on master. I've established an environment for it. So it goes into the review folder and it automatically gives it this CI build reference name, which is going to be the build of the branch itself. So basically it's just the branch name essentially here. And then I'm going to give a URL. And so I'm going to have this dynamic URL slug. And then I've provided this variable in my CI/CD variables, which is just the root directory here, or the root domain. And so all that's happening in this case, same exact situation where it's doing an rsync. It's going to take my built application from the build stage, artifacts, the dist directory, rsyncing the dist directory into where I've configured Nginx, and automatically creates a folder for it. And that folder will always be serving up the review application on it. So essentially, same exact process as my deploy, except I have a runner that's actually has the Nginx server on it, and it deploys directly into into the directory with Nginx on that runner application, and that's what's serving up the site itself. So what that looks like is if I go to merge requests, maybe what I'll do is I'll just create a quick branch. So create a new branch, test site, base it off of master, create the merge request. I'm going to remove this so it doesn't tell me I can't do anything there. Submit the merge request. And then I'll open up my IDE. And for the sake of this, I'm just going to change the README file and add something in here so it kicks off the build. Now, if I go back to my merge request, we can see what the pipeline looks like for this. So it's basically the same thing, except for, yeah, it runs the build, runs all of my tests. And then at this point, it's going to run my review application, provide me the link to my VM URL. And I also have a stop job in here. And that stop job basically does the opposite of rsync and goes and deletes that entire folder that was created for the review application. That's all it's doing. Again, just with the static sites. And then I have my DAS job, which runs after it's deployed that. So it points, my DAS job is set up to point directly to my review application that's built up on that VM and run the DAS job against it there. So what you end up with then is, your review apps, you'll see the DAS test running against it. I have performance tests. It's also pointing directly to, actually I've moved since I've done this merge request, I've moved to using performance only on the master branch. It's no longer running on any of my branches that are for feature branches or anything that's not master essentially. So that got moved over there. But yeah, the process is the same. So then you've got your build, test, review stage, ran DAST against it, and you can see all of this stuff in here. Again, not using any of the Kubernetes integrations, but managed to get all of the different jobs running from AutoDevOps besides AutoBuild as part of this process. You'll see it, like I talked about with container scanning, I had to do the same thing with Dast. I wanted to point my Dast site, to only run on anything but master. And then also the website changed to be the same exact URL slug that's going to be generated for the review app. So it knows exactly where to point to it rather than looking on, your actual production environment or trying to manually set that. Questions about this process so far from anyone? Things, direction you want to talk about or go, or questions you guys had from customers around how to do review apps or utilize any of our include jobs into their process? Cool. Well, I mean, that's more or less all I wanted to show, was just the ability to, build up a review app, knowing that you can just use a VM to be the runner and also be the thing that's going to serve the application. So minimal amount of requirements to set up a runner to do that type of thing. I think what becomes more handy with Kubernetes is the fact that you don't need to run it on the runner itself. You can deploy to a pod or something like that would be in the same namespace as even your production or your staging environments. This just kind of bypasses that step by saying, hey, if my runner also is the place where the deployment happens, it can orchestrate that and push it into the right place. It could even also be you have an Nginx server running it's not on the runner itself, and the runner would just have to authenticate with it in the same way that I'm doing that right now for my production job. So my production job just uses an Alpine image to do the actual build, to do the deployment. I could change this. It could even just be the same one that I was using before for my build and test phases. I just chose this one because Alpines are very, very small images, and I didn't need very much for it. So basically, it just becomes an orchestrator for taking that artifact from my build and syncing that up into the right directories. You could do the same thing with the review app, but it's kind of nice to have that be part of your runner as well. Just makes that easier to maintain since they're just ephemeral environments. Thoughts, questions, places you guys want to go talk more about this stuff, questions you've had from customers?
Ryan, this is very good in terms of what you've put together. Couple of questions I have, and these aren't really GitLab related. These are just kind of general questions that I'm just observations. So you use Linode server. I'm not familiar with Linode. Could you kind of describe it a little more?
So Linode is just basically, I've just used it for many, many years. It's basically just a cloud provider, essentially similar to like what an AWS would be. And so Linode itself would be the equivalent to like an EC2 instance on AWS or DigitalOcean. I think they call them like droplets. It'd be similar to a droplet. It's basically just somewhere where I can run a server that can do compute power. For me, it was just Linode's easy because I can just spin up a new instance. I can pick whatever language I want it to be, what data center it is, and how big of a compute instance I want. I can create one from there and then install whatever I need to be on it for it to be the runner, which is basically the small Go binary that we have for GitLab runners that can install on pretty much any distribution. And then in this case, I had to install Nginx and set up Nginx config so that it would point to the right directories and host the files correctly.
Okay. And so on Linode, you created a VM. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yep. So I just created a VM here and that was it. This could be bare metal. This could be anything to that regard. But yeah, just trying to do this outside of the Docker Kubernetes route, just because one, there's a lot of customers who are not doing that stuff. And so they need to know that they can still take advantage of a lot of the capabilities we have. Even people who are wondering about environments, like they didn't think that you could have environments if you weren't using Kubernetes clusters. And it's like, no, you totally can. You define those in your jobs and you just point it to the right place and everything works correctly that way.
Yeah, this is excellent because this has come up from a lot of customers that I present to. I've kind of gone down the Kubernetes path to show the stuff, and they immediately kind of raise their finger and go, but we don't use Kubernetes. And then kind of trying to backpedal out of that demo is a little bit more difficult. So this is awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I was trying to get with this is like, the only thing that you're not getting with, for environments, for example, you can't use our Canary deploy because that depends on underlying Kubernetes APIs to do that type of stuff, right? So you lose some of that type of functionality around this. The one thing I haven't gotten set up yet is Prometheus. And I'm also going to set up Prometheus on my Linode instance and just point that integration that we have for Prometheus down in here to my manually configure it. So basically I just put my URL into this, I activate it, and then I'll have to set up the metrics on the other side of it so that you'll be able to visualize all of that stuff in the environments in the same way you would, or metrics rather, same way you would if you were using Kubernetes to do that inside the cluster itself.
Thanks for mentioning that. I was just about to ask about Prometheus because that's the other, that kind of ties the story back to the beginning.
Yep.
What are we working on? Is it working? Is it failing? You need those feedback metrics. So that's
exactly. Yep. So you can still hook up to an external one. And in fact, a lot of our customers are doing that now. They're not necessarily using our Prometheus integration, but they may hook it together by manually setting it up at a per project level that way.
Do you mind clicking on the security dashboard there, please?
Sure.
Okay, that's cool. So it basically just scanned the Alpine image here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So for the container scanning one here, what it's actually scanning is the one that I pushed to my registry from that manual scheduled job. So it's only scanning this one, and that was what I was getting at with the what I had to override for that job to work. So that was this reference here. So normally it'd be a little more dynamic in that this, the CI application and the tags would be, I have this manually added as latest, but this is usually like the commit hash. So it's checking that on every build. But since I'm not doing it that way and I'm just using an image for my test and build stage that doesn't need to change very often, I can just point directly to that since it's my only Docker image, but still can continue to use the container scanning that way. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool.
And in this case, that Docker image that you got, does that end up in your registry there?
Yeah. Yep. So what I've done, so this build stage, and I put a little note in here because it doesn't always run, only runs on schedules. But yeah, the script basically all it's doing is saying, log me into the registry. So we have all these nice variables that handle all that for you. So you don't have to do anything. You just paste that line in and it will authenticate with the registry from your project. Then I'm running Docker build, container build image. And so what I've done there is said, okay, the name of my CI registry image because that's based off of my project, tag it with latest. And so down here, what I'm doing is saying, build that with that name. And what it's doing when I say build that is because I'm running on a Docker image itself, like this special Docker image that we have, the image is going to go find my Docker file at my root, go and grab this Alpine image from Docker Hub, and then add in Git because that's the only thing that I needed it to do. Otherwise, it would have run fine just on that one. And then if I go back to my image, then once it's built that out, that image, then it just pushes it to the registry, and that's all this job does. And so once it pushes to the registry, I'll see the Docker image running in here on latest, and here's my image. You can see it's created 3 hours ago and all that information about it. And so anytime that scheduled job runs, it's going to override this existing one and then run container scanning against that during the build process.
You mentioned this before, I think when the screen was frozen. Where was the schedules configuration?
Oh, yeah. So if you go to CI/CD and go to schedules, I've created a new schedule here, but if I click into edit it, all it's going to do is, you give it a name, you tell it how often you want it to run. So I'm having it just run once a week since, given what I'm doing here, that's good enough. I'll give it a target branch, which actually now I want to be master since I've merged this in. And then I save this scheduled job. I can even play this if I want to just run this manually. I can see what that looks like now here. And you'll notice I have this new stage called setup. And so now it's going to build my Docker image. And then my build stage is going to use that image. And then my test stage is going to run the container scanning against that image that I had there. So maybe a little bit out of order here. I might consider doing something like where it's got this setup stage, and then the next one is run container scanning against it before I even get to my build and test, because that's obviously where you could run into vulnerabilities. So that would probably be a better route to do there rather than having it be part of the test. But that's kind of how I have it set up now. Yeah, if you want to see this job, it's just well, when it gets picked up. Any other questions or things you guys wanted to talk about or me to go into about this project here?
Can you open up the running app?
Oh, the live application?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've got the live here. So this is the application itself, which is just this one page, and you can click on videos and watch them and stuff like that. But this is all the application is. Now, if I go to my merge request and open up the review app, oh, found a bunch of stuff. That's good. You'll see that it says test site review.demo all the things, and so the test site is coming from the name of the merge or of the branch itself, and then I have defined the path for. Where did I get lost here? Oh yeah, I define the path for review.demo all the things, and then if I look at my domains. The only thing that I had to do on this side to get all this working was go into my DNS for my domains. And you can see where I've defined, the wildcard.review. And so that means that anything that comes in there is going to point to this place. And then my server is going to know where to handle serving up the rest of that. And you can see my live environment points to my other server. So this is the IP address for this Linode, this VM, and then the other one's for the main VM, and then it just knows how to route that stuff from there.
Cool.
Cool. That's more or less all I had. So happy to stick around if you guys wanted to dive into anything specific, though.
This is great, Brian. Thank you for sharing this. This is excellent stuff.
Cool. Well, let me know if you guys want to. I mean, you can use this project. You can clone this project and use it. The thing that we'll have to talk about is setting up obviously you'd have to set up your own your own runner. And then also the variables that were associated with this. So I've got a couple of variables that are for like the keys to authenticate with SSH, my app domain that I use inside the CI file to point to it. And there's a few things. There's not much in there. More or less works with just our defined jobs, just making sure you got the right auth for various places and the right URLs to know where to send it.
Yeah, could you, so I am looking at your repo right now, or project right now, and I am not able to see any of that. So could you put that like in a snippet or something? Or, oh, well,
I'll just add me to project. What's your
It's SKAMANI.
SKA what?
MANI.
There we go.
Yep, that's me.
I'll add you as developer.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, throw mterhar in there too, please.
Yeah. Our little invite thing's not.
Just put an M at the beginning. Yeah.
Oh, it's M.
Yeah, mterhar.
There we go.
There you go. Yeah, I'm gonna have to figure out the Nginx config for IIS, because I have some customers who would want this. You know, they want to deploy their web forms, old-timey apps, and I think this is a nice recipe for making review apps of whatever flavor that don't support containers and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, you could use, so IIS is its own, you know, HTTP server, right? So I think instead of installing Nginx on there, they could theoretically do the same thing with ISS.
Yeah, I just meant porting the config over, right? So it
Yeah,
acts the same as your Nginx config does.
Yep, totally. Let's see what the Nginx. I can show you what I did for Nginx to. I don't know if that will help, but I can show you what I did for configuration to get that set up and running.
Putting that as a snippet in the project would probably be helpful.
Yeah.
I think I understand the theory behind it, but there may be some.
I like the idea of the snippet. That's a good idea. I'll do that. I'll have to figure out what I put in there, but yeah, no problem. I'll do that. Cool. Well, that's all I got then. Any other questions before we jump?
Thank you again.
Well, thanks, guys.
Thanks, Brian.
We'll chat with y'all later.